All right. The first question that I have today, Pastor Steve, for you is, if I can find it, where did I put that? Is from Janine, and it's in 1 Corinthians 15:29. And she says, "What does Paul mean when he says, 'What will they do who are baptized for the dead? Why then are they baptized for the dead?'" Question mark.
Okay.
15:29.
What does Paul mean?
Yeah, what does Paul mean when he says that
I know
phrase?
exactly what Paul means there. And let me tell you, there are over 200 interpretations of that passage.
Are there really?
Yeah, 200. And the reason that there's so many is because Paul doesn't make it clear what he's talking about.
Right.
And all we know from the passage, the whole chapter is about the resurrection of Christ and the fact that the Corinthians were believing Greek philosophy at the time, which taught that the body basically wasn't worth anything. It wasn't something that the gods or God would ever be interested in, and so there was no purpose in having a body after death. So the prevailing philosophy in Greece was that there was no resurrection, and all of chapter 15 is about Paul saying, if there's no resurrection, then Jesus isn't raised from the dead, and if Jesus isn't raised from the dead, then we're liars. And then he goes through and he begins making points about the fact that there are obviously the Bible teaches exactly that, and that these guys are not even consistent with their own teaching. And so when you look at what Paul says about this situation, he's just gone through this whole thing with the order of the resurrections and that kind of stuff. I'm not going to get into all that. But then in verse 29, he says, "Otherwise, what will they do who are baptized for the dead if the dead do not rise at all? Why then are they baptized for the dead?" And one of the points that you need to make when you're going through and you're looking at that passage is that Paul doesn't say, "Otherwise, what will we do who are baptized for the dead? If the dead do not rise at all, why then are we baptized for the dead?" And so what Paul's doing is putting that on the outside of him. Now, there's all kinds of different ideas about what was going on. The Marcionites used to, they're a group of heretics in the 2nd century, and they were baptizing for the dead just like Mormons do. And so what the Mormon church teaches is that they can do a proxy baptism. And so they look up genealogies and they find people and they have people get baptized in their place so that these people can go to heaven. And the Marcionites were an early cult, and they did something along the same lines. But it was condemned almost immediately. Well, actually, it was immediately condemned. The practice was, and that didn't happen until the 2nd century. And so, putting this in the 1st century, putting that stuff in the 1st century is a question. Salvation by baptism wasn't even something that was believed until after the 2nd century. And so you don't have teaching in the 1st century that teaches that you need to be baptized to be saved. That kind of thing. And the Bible's actually pretty clear on this. And so there's different ideas about what's going on there. One of them is the idea of filling ranks, that maybe the people at Corinth, they didn't do baptisms until somebody in their fellowship died. And so then they had a baptism and basically filled up the place that person left at the end. So that's a possibility. Some people have another interpretation of the passage is that maybe they were being baptized over the dead, like having baptisms in cemeteries. And so, to express faith in the resurrection. There are some who think that being baptized for the dead is, if the dead is taken singular and not plural, that they're being baptized for the one who died, which is Jesus. And so that's a possibility. There were also Greek cults in the area. There was one Greek cult that was pretty popular, and it was the Eleusinian mysteries. And they had washings in the sea that were needed to experience bliss in the afterlife. And so, it might have been something that was a hangover from a Greek cult or something along those lines. And ultimately, you don't know what Paul's talking about because he doesn't expound on it. What we do know, and another possibility is that what Paul is talking about in the passage is the idea of death being connected with baptism. And so you have this in Colossians and also in Romans chapter 6, where Paul talks about the fact that when you get baptized, that what you're doing is you're picturing your death. Your old man is dying and being buried, and your new man is rising from the dead. And so maybe there's some connection there. But when you get to the end of it, nobody knows. And so I don't know. I don't know anybody else who knows, and I sure know that the Mormons don't know. So.
All right, Janine. Hopefully that helps. Or you can go and look up the other 200, or
Yeah.
you covered what, 10, other 190 that
Yeah,
ideas that there are.
194 or something.
Yeah.